welcome you all to the first Climate Solution Jams, and this one is going to be on water. So we have some fantastic panelists here today to participate in a conversation around water. I'd like to thank our partners, Entrepreneurship at UBC, the Innovation Partnerships at UBC, waterNEXT, and Foresight. I'd also like to take a second to acknowledge the lands on which Foresight offices are located and on which it was founded. They are the part of the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Tsawwassen nations. We realize that some of you may be joining us from across Canada and even around the world, and we hope you take a second to acknowledge the traditional keepers of the land for which you find yourself on. I'd like to remind everyone that this will be recorded an event. Zoom might have already told you that, but in case you're not aware, we will be recording this session and we will be making this available to all the registered participants afterwards. Quickly here, I'll run through what we're going to be doing. I mentioned some of our partners earlier. We will have a chance for them to introduce themselves, tell you what role they play in innovation and the water ecosystem. And then we'll turn to our panelists. The session will be moderated by Shannon Bard from Entrepreneurship at UBC, and we'll have a distinguished group of panelists who are experts in various parts of the water industry to share some of their challenges and to answer your questions. After they give you an overview of some of the issues that they are facing and how you might be able to help them, we will have breakout rooms for 30 minutes where you'll be able to select the breakout room that you would like to go into to learn more about that specific area. I believe you will have the option to also change breakout rooms so you can say hi to multiple folks and participate in multiple conversations if that suits your needs. We'll then wrap up just before 12:30 Pacific time with some closing remarks and talk about maybe some upcoming events that we'll have in this vein. With that, and next slide, please, I want to talk about our aims here today. We at Foresight are primarily a small startup, technology startup accelerator. And the number one reason that startups fail is because their technology turns into a product that nobody wants to buy. This is some information from Industry Canada. 42% of startup businesses fail because there's no market need for their services or products. And that's what we hope to address here today. We want to focus on problem-driven innovation. We want people to understand the challenges that industry is facing and the things that they want to buy now. That's what we've come together here to do, to try to understand what how technology can be turned into products that will fly off the shelves, that will solve real immediate pains with high intensity and high frequency. And that's our goal today. Next slide, please. We believe the truth is out there. That technology commercialization does not have to be hit and miss. That by talking to the people who have the problems, that by fostering conversations, we can allow the development of successful businesses, the technologies and the solutions we need for the climate problems that we face, and ultimately build drivers of the Canadian economy. I've listed a few books here if you're not familiar with them. Lean Startup by Eric Ries, The 4 Steps of the Epiphany, Business Model Generation. These are some of the foundational concepts that we at Foresight teach and build our teachings upon, and I believe is probably reflected in what Entrepreneurship at UBC is basing their model on. It's all about customer development. It's all about talking to customers. What we sometimes don't have time to do is talk to enough customers. And that's why we've brought some of the gentlemen and the folks here today that we have to give them a megaphone so they can tell their story to a lot of people at once. We want to build that understanding of what the customer problems are, and that's why we think this is a good forum for us to do that. Without further ado, I will pass it off to my colleague, the CEO of Foresight, Jeanette Jackson, to tell you a little bit about more what Foresight does and why they're interested in the water space and why they're interested in the climate jams. Jeanette?
Thank you. Can everyone see me okay and hear me? Glorious. Stephen, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Water Jams today. My name is Jeanette Jackson. I'm the CEO of Foresight Clean Tech Accelerator Canada. I'm sure we're all a little hot over the last few days, and I think there's no better time to talk about water consumption, water maintenance, water management than when we're all faced with this tremendous heat wave. And obviously, everyone is looking to stay cool, and water is one of the main ways that we can do that. So a little bit about Foresight. We are really here to support the identification and validation of clean tech opportunities and the successful commercialization of solutions. So Stephen chimed in a little bit. We've traditionally worked with earlier stage ventures. For us, that means everyone up to TRL 910. Once they become going concerns, 100 plus more people, Series B round of funding, we kind of step out of the way and let the leaders of those companies do their thing. In terms of waterNEXT, so we look at clean tech broadly across Canada. And in doing so, there became opportunities to break down clean tech into some subsectors, and water is one of those critical ones. I know a lot of us think about climate and sustainability as GHG reduction, but at the end of the day, water is playing a critical role in ag tech, mining, oil and gas, transportation, you name it. We use water for everything, and it's a vital resource that we need to protect and sustain so that we can all continue to do business as we do it. So waterNEXT is a pan-Canadian initiative that is really intended to bring the ecosystems across the country together so that we can be more effective in accelerating and commercializing technologies that will help all industry that use water do that more effectively. And so if you haven't been on our website, we've actually mapped out 460 water ventures across the country. And we continue to look at new programmings that enhance our existing programming so that water can become a key pillar of the climate discussions broadly across Canada, and of course within BC, given that we are pretty dynamic, that we have the coastline with oceans, and of course a pretty large amount of fresh water that feeds our hydro and energy systems across the province. So thank you so much for joining today. I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful panel discussion, lots of people talking about important things that we need to address, and Stephen will be your guide through that today. Shannon and team at UBC, I don't know if Carrie's on the line as well. Thank you for having us, and we look forward to a great session. Good luck, everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Jeanette. And speaking of entrepreneurship at UBC, I will pass it off to my colleague, Shannon Bard, who's been a wonderful partner as we came up with a concept to address this shared problem that we have. So Shannon, you want to tell us a little bit more about E at UBC?
Sure, thank you very much. So Entrepreneurship at UBC is an incubator that's being developed at UBC. And within that, we specifically have a program called the Climate Venture Studio, which really focuses on climate solutions and clean tech. And so my colleague Paul Needham is on the line now. The two of us developed and launched this last September. And the idea is that if we're in a climate emergency, perhaps we should act with urgency. And how can we accelerate bringing research solutions out into market in a faster manner, navigating through the regulatory barriers, making sure there's appropriate technology market matching, and understanding the social license issues as well. And so we've been supporting a number of different research-based ventures, a lot of deep tech companies that are coming out of the university, and we're really excited about these opportunities to partner with Foresight. Foresight is a place that a lot of our ventures can then find a home, and a lot of them are in both locations. Now, I wanted to pass it off now to my colleague Sahan, who's within Innovation Partnerships at UBC. Sahan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Happy to be a part of Climate Solutions Jams. Excited to get this series started. I'm Sahan Ranamukha. I'm from the Innovation Partnerships team at Innovation UBC. Innovation UBC supports research to impact at UBC, broadly supporting a researcher's journey to making a positive change in our society. And the Innovation Partnerships team works with researchers and external stakeholders from various industries to develop partnerships that will foster technology de-risking and research translation into real-world settings. As you probably know, UBC is a research powerhouse, and we have fantastic expertise, capacity, as well as facilities to support research to impact. But oftentimes we cannot do this alone. We can't take our inventions and our knowledge to the outside world alone. So we need partnerships with various stakeholders. And likewise, what we see is that community and industry partners also need a lot of support from an expertise standpoint, not just in one discipline, but across multiple disciplines to de-risk their future direction. And that's where innovation partnerships comes along with entrepreneurship at UBC and a whole other set of services and capabilities that Innovation UBC has. So we're really looking forward to how this goes, but primarily, as Stephen said, we're really looking forward to the dialogue between people who work in the real world setting and people who are actually in the labs coming up with new inventions and new knowledge. So looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sahan. Before I pass it over to my colleague, Shannon, to get started with the panel, I will say something. The panel today does not reflect, I think, where the diversity of solutions will come from. Given more time, we would have sought out, we believe there are experts in the field that are more reflective of the solution providers. So we do sort of look for panels that are more representative of our society, and unfortunately just weren't in the time allotted able to come up with the folks that would reflect the industry expertise that we're hoping for, but we hope to do better in future panels. With that, I will turn it over to Shannon to introduce our panelists and get things underway with the questions and the answers.
Great. Thank you so much. So what we're going to be doing now is we've got 4 different esteemed panelists, and I want to thank all of you for coming today. We have Paul Kadota, who's representing Metro Vancouver. He's the program manager for utility research and innovation for wastewater division. We have Bud Fraser, who has sort of a similar role within UBC. And one interesting thing that we consider about university campuses is that they're basically municipalities as well. And we're looking for opportunities where procurement at universities can be a way to help actually drive adoption of new clean tech. Then we have Jeff Guild. He's the vice president from BlueTech Research, and he advises a variety of different innovation water technology corporations. So has a broad depth of knowledge across a variety of different technologies in the water sector. And we're finishing off with John McCartney, who's joining us from Chile. From Santiago, and he has experience on the mining side. He's a hydrogeologist, and he works with mine water management specialists. So what we're going to do to start off, again, just echoing what Stephen has said, is that our goals here for today is to start a conversation. We wanted to give the ventures and some of the researchers that are on the line an opportunity to hear from the variety of different experts that we have on the panel what some of their most pressing problems are around water. And of course, there's many different pathways you can take to get to those final goals. So what I'm going to ask each of the 4 panelists to do at the beginning is to introduce themselves, share with us what the goals are for their organization, what the vision of their organization is. Because if you have a good understanding of what their vision is, that can help align you with how you could help create a solution for what their biggest problems are. And then finally, of course, to introduce what their biggest challenges are with water. So the format for today is we have about 30 minutes where we're going to do these various presentations of these different challenges and have each of the panelists speak. We'll have a half an hour of question and answer. And what I'd encourage people to do is, as you come up with questions, please put them in the chat at the moment you come up with them. And then when we go into the question and answer, we have the moderators are scanning the chat to bring those questions back up so that we can have them all queued up and ready to go. And then for the last half an hour of this session, that's when we'll go into breakout sessions with the different panelists. And you'll have a chance actually to ask some more in-depth questions directly about some of your technology. You'll have a chance to introduce yourself and what your venture is at that point. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start off with Paul, and Paul I know has also has a video he's going to share with us. So Paul, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Shannon. I'm Paul Kadota, Program Manager of the Innovation Group here at Metro Vancouver. And for those who are not familiar, Metro Vancouver is a federation of 21 member municipalities, electoral area, and Treaty First Nations, and we undertake regional planning, and we provide services, bulk water to our municipalities, wastewater treatment, solid waste services, air quality management, regional parks, and low-income housing. The vision for Metro Vancouver is really to create a more livable region. And I think we've been at it for some time now, but they're starting to put real targets to what we're trying to achieve. And in the 2050 Climate Action Plan, the idea is to have the entire region carbon neutral by that time frame. And that's every single sector, whether it be transportation, buildings, industry, our own utility, everything. And that's a tall order to achieve. As a matter of fact, the internal modeling identified that we actually needed negative emission technologies to actually achieve that. So it's not good enough to conserve and reduce and displace fossil-based fuels. We actually need to go the other way around and sequester CO2. So that's really the overall vision. And yesterday we talked about problem areas, and I said, well, where do we start? We have a lot. With climate change, we know that our snowpacks in our watersheds are going to be diminished over time because we'll have more mild winters, meaning less snowpack, therefore less storage in our watersheds. So that's a big looming issue that we need to deal with. On the wastewater side, where my expertise is at, there's a lot to be said about making wastewater treatment processes more efficient. So we're talking about a new type of sludge. So instead of flock sludge, we're looking at granular sludge. We're talking about redirecting carbon so that we can get more energy recovery from our anaerobic digesters. That technology is 100 years old. It's time we looked at a different technology to produce renewable energy. We're looking at things like shortcut nitrogen removal. Ammonia is a big issue in terms of wastewater discharges. So a more efficient way of removing nitrogen. But let's not say remove nitrogen. Let's talk about nutrient recovery. Did you know that for 1 ton of commercial nitrogen fertilizer, 10 tons of CO2 is emitted for commercial fertilizer? We at our wastewater treatment plant, we've got a lot of nitrogen that we're moving and passing through our system. What if we can recover that nitrogen and displace that high nitrogen, carbon intensive nitrogen fertilizer with essentially zero carbon nitrogen? So these are some of the ideas that we're thinking about. And when we look across, not across the pond, but look north to carbon engineering, we're reminded that their business model is about sequestering CO2 from the atmosphere. And that's what, 350 parts per million, 400 parts per million, something like that. One of the areas that we're exploring now is sequestering CO2 from the ocean. That's a big frontier that we want to explore as well. In terms of the video that's about to play, just as a preamble, about 6 years ago, Dr. Nemi Banthia from UBC Civil Engineering came to us and said, hey, what's your biggest problem that you're dealing with in your collection system? I'm a materials concrete guy. And we said, well, we've got a lot of odor and corrosion issues. If we can extend the useful life of our infrastructure, valued at billions of dollars, then you could be saving the taxpayer a lot of money by extending that life. So maybe you can go and find out if there's a technology that can help reduce corrosion issues. So if you can play the video, it's just 1 minute. And this is what Dr. Banthia came up with.
Welcome to Metro Moment. At a decommissioned sanitary sewer overflow chamber in Delta, Metro Vancouver staff and University of British Columbia student engineers are testing a special coating which helps reduce corrosion. Sewer gases such as hydrogen sulfide corrode concrete and steel, causing the need for costly repairs. The carbon-neutral hydrogen sulfide resistant coating may be able to significantly enhance the lifespan of concrete sewer pipes and equipment across the region. As part of a collaborative research agreement, the coating has already been tested in a lab. The application will provide a real-world comparison against uncoated walls, and monitoring will continue through 2021. This has been a Metro Moment. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for regular updates. Together, we make our region strong.
And back to you, Shannon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. You really did a great job going right through the watershed, all the way from source water, all the way down to effluent, and then having us really think about what are the challenges that we have as a society to have to deal with these, from sequestering CO2 to extending the life of infrastructure, and thinking about how we can use some of our waste in an industrial ecology philosophy to get renewable energy. So that's fabulous. Thank you so much. So we're going to move now on to Bud Fraser. So Bud, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone. Good morning. So I'm the Senior Planning and Sustainability Engineer at the Campus and Community Planning Department at UBC. And so I think most of you probably know that UBC is an interesting hybrid of an institution and a community. We're up to around 80,000 people, daytime population in non-COVID times. So significant size. We have a pretty big portfolio of buildings, various types, institutional buildings as well as some commercial spaces and residences. Quite a significant population, some of it permanent, some of it student housing. In terms of our vision, we are currently working on an update to our climate action plan, which like Metro has a 2050 carbon neutral target already, but we are looking at accelerating that significantly and are going to bring a new climate action plan forward by the end of this year, which will probably be significantly more aggressive than what we currently have. So stay tuned for that. 2019, I managed a project to develop a water action plan for UBC. It obviously does have some linkages with climate issues, and what the vision of that plan really was to really help us become even stronger in terms of our being a responsible water user in the region, and taking into account these supply challenges, for example, that Paul mentioned. So how can we make our campus more and more efficient over time? We have already reduced our water consumption by over 50% since 2000. It's just been steadily declining through a whole bunch of various infrastructure and building projects. But we want to continue that. We want to continue to be more and more efficient. But as the low-hanging fruit gets picked, it gets a little bit harder as we go along. So that's what we've been looking at from a conservation perspective. And some of the specific issues and challenges that we currently have, some of these are a little bit unique to UBC and maybe a bit different than a typical municipality because of the nature of our uses. But I think some are in parallel too. I think it will overlap with sort of the institutional and commercial sector more than anything else. But one of the really interesting ones is mostly connected with research, which is being a research intensive university. We have a lot of, I would call legacy water uses that are single pass or open loop water uses. So for example, we have a lab with helium compressors that are water cooled, and the water just passes through the heat exchangers. So not an efficient use of water. We actually prohibited this type of thing in our technical guidelines years ago, but we still have some legacy systems in place, research installations that were put in some cases decades ago. And so these are really great opportunities to reduce water consumption. As one example, there's also water features as another example of kind of single pass water in some cases. So The problem I would put forward is kind of, it's in two stages. One is understanding where the equipment is, because you might be surprised that we don't actually know where all of these installations are. We have hundreds of buildings, and within these buildings, we've got probably thousands of research installations. We have certain buildings that we know have high water use. We're not sure why. Some other buildings still need better metering. Even the ones that do have metering, they only have a main meter. So we can't tell much from that main meter other than, yes, this building has high flows, some of which happen at night when nobody's there. So clearly there's some equipment there. So the first challenge is understanding where these high water uses are occurring within the buildings, tracking them down. And then the second challenge is technical solutions needed to replace or update those systems, which generally is going to involve finding a way to reject the heat, assuming it's a cooling application, in a building that doesn't have a cooling infrastructure built into it that'll handle that. So that's the main kind of issue that I've been trying to chase up for a number of years. I think there's some other kind of distribution scale issues, like trying to better understand where the losses are from our distribution system is another challenge. And we also have a number of non-potable or alternate water source systems in some of our green buildings, like rainwater harvesting and reuse. We've had a lot of challenges with those systems as well. A lot of technical challenges and operational challenges that we've been working to address and hope to prevent in the future. So that's it in a nutshell. Look forward to further discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Bud. I think one thing that you've really shone a light on is the fact that a lot of large institutions don't have a good handle, especially when they've been long-standing for 100 years or many, many decades, actually what infrastructure they have and where it is. And this is not uncommon. Municipalities have this problem. Government has this problem. Large corporations that have a long history have this problem. And the expectation is, of course, they must know where all their sewer lines are, and they must know what the use is. But in fact, that's not the case. So that creates a huge opportunity, not only to install sensors and to make intelligent decisions and to look for solutions that might be based on machine learning or other aspects where you could help sort of resolve and control some of those. So thank you for shining the light on that, Bud. Now I'd like to turn it over now to Jeff Guild. Over to you, Jeff.
Great, thanks, Shannon. And yeah, nice to see everyone. A lot of familiar faces on the call today, so great to be with you all, and appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective. So I guess you said introduction, then our vision and goals, and then maybe some of the challenge areas. So I guess for an introduction, I have about 25 years now of commercial and technical experience in the water sector. It's a lot longer than I'd like to admit. I've worked with water startups, investors, and solution providers, technology companies, and corporate end users. So I've been on all sides of the desk at this point. So I think I bring a decent perspective on some of the needs in industry. My origin story, I was bit by the innovation bug pretty early in my career at NORAM Engineering in Vancouver, and ran their biosystems group for a number of years, and really got involved in scale-up engineering for a few early stage technology startups in the Vancouver area, like Austera, Strubite Recovery Company. In the early days, we kind of helped them get to commercial scale in a short amount of time. And that spilled over to me joining in the very early days of BlueTech Research, where we're probably best known for tracking and benchmarking new water technology innovation against existing technologies in the marketplace and established technologies. And at BlueTech, I get to advise companies on technology adoption, on innovation strategy, portfolio development, and growth strategy. And that spans, relevant to this call, I get to work with a lot of earlier stage companies on their market segmentation and prioritization and market entry strategy. And I work with a lot of the larger corporates on how they're developing their portfolio to future-proof their portfolio into the future. Probably most relevant to this call, I work with a lot of corporate end users, and I think that's the hat that Shannon wants me to wear today. And we do a lot of assessment of their pain points in their operation and help them identify the universe of solutions they should be tracking to address those pain points inside their the walls of their production facilities. So I'll be wearing that hat during the reverse pitch part of the session today. in terms of our mission, I'll start off saying, one common problem that we see, an all too common problem that we see, is that companies are trying to find a home for something that they've developed, and that's and trying to see where it will stick. So customer discovery is lacking upfront. The value proposition is often ill-defined for products that are trying to find a home in the market, and it really leads to a waste. It's a waste of resources, human capital and financial capital. So that really was the impetus to creating BlueTech Research. We track the success factors and failure nodes across the sector. We are pretty obsessed with water technology adoption and what makes for a successful venture and what doesn't. We've got a lot of examples. I'll share some in the breakout room if people are interested, but you can look at kind of the graveyard of technologies out there, such as supercritical water oxidation and people trying to force things into applications in other areas. And then there's some fantastic positive examples too. I think I saw Akuva online, and they did early work on market segmentation so that they could have the best chance of accelerating their path to market. And so that's really our role, is to support the efficient use of capital to solve global water issues. And that's how we support all the different stakeholders that we work with in the industry. So that's our vision. In terms of the challenge areas, there's, again, as Paul and Bud both mentioned, there are many in the corporate water area. And I guess if you were to break them down into three main buckets, you could break them down into source water challenges, right, around emerging contaminants, safe, steady supply, so water stewardship of their source waters. And then maybe the second bucket would be in process, so clean in place operations, cooling towers, reverse osmosis units, and making those more efficient. And then the wastewater side, so reuse, optimization, circular economy, upcycling carbon, many of the themes that Paul mentioned around circular economy, and he used nitrogen as an example. We're seeing all those needs in industry as well. These all feed into broader water minimization goals that our corporates face. So I would say virtually all of our corporate clients, whether they're in food and beverage, the Coca-Colas and the Nestle's of the world, consumer goods, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, L'Oreal, textiles, mining, all these segments, they are very focused right now on water reduction across the board, all of them. They're coming to BlueTech. Water avoidance as a theme is important, and alternative water sourcing. Almost all of them have made commitments now to hit anywhere between 20 to 50% reduction in their water footprint by the year 2030. They make those commitments often before they've made any plan around how they're going to actually achieve this number and this goal. And then they go back to operations and say, where can we squeeze more out? And there's some low-hanging fruit. You can do some water optimization to get you partway there, but they really need to be pushing the envelope on different technologies in those three buckets I mentioned before, in all three, source water, in process, and on the wastewater side, to hit those bigger target numbers. They can't get there just addressing a couple of problems in one area or another. So the challenge they have, the big challenge they have actually, is as much as there's a technical challenge to achieve those goals, it's in enumerating the problem they have in the first place and benchmarking. And Bud mentioned benchmarking in the context of what water are we using and where. That benchmarking is just really difficult to do with the corporates. And then prioritization of spend. Do we spend that money inside the fence line to solve some problems? Or is there more magnitude with that every dollar spent to work in the watershed that we draw water from and do other projects outside our fence line? So these are big issues for the corporates that we work with, and I'm happy to explore those areas further.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jeff. I really like the way that you separated out the three buckets, starting with source and then going through process and then with wastewater, because I think that's a really nice theme to think of this industrial ecology piece. You got to think about where the water is coming from, how it's being treated within the processes you're working with, and what is the end of life, and how can we reuse that so we're not wasting that water that we have that's so critical. The benchmarking piece around sort of impact metrics, having metrics of where are you using it? If you don't know how much you're using or what the quality of that water is, it's very difficult to make informed decisions on that. So that's a really critical role that's going to play a piece within this. And having that kind of data is how you can actually make those decisions to allocate your resources and allocate your capital in the most efficient use possible. So we're making a really positive impact. So thank you so much for that, Jeff. So we're going to move on now to John McCartney, who's our last panelist, and I'm going to turn it over now to John.
Hi, good morning. So my name is John McCartney. I'm joining you from Chile, and you might ask why Chile? Chile produces around about 30% of the world's copper. Some of the biggest copper mines are in Chile. It happens to be also the driest place in the north of Chile in the world. It doesn't rain, or if it rains very little. And so if you're in mining and if you're in water, Chile's a pretty good place to be. And I guess that's one of the issues with mining faces. You know, water touches so many things in mining. It's water supply, it's operational issues. You know, these mines are mining very deep. They can be open pits or they can be underground mines, or they interact with those natural resources. And the issues become, you know, do you have too much water or do you have too little water? There's never just enough water. So it's managing all that. And I guess one of the more topical things these days is the risks around that. So anything which is managing water risk and identifying risks and being able to be proactive and identify what those risks are and have something in place to manage them in time is really important. And you know, some of my background, I worked for a big company called Schlumberger, which is a technology company in the oil and gas space. It's the biggest provider of technology to the oil and gas industry. You know, they spend $1 billion on R&D each year. One of my roles was looking at technology transfer to the mining industry and around water issues, whether it's pumps or drilling, fancy drilling techniques, or even just simple stuff, taking chemicals, looking at to reduce permeability, to stop this interaction of water into the mine. Because one of the things is when you've got too much water, which could be the case in a mine in Canada, of course, what the implications of that are quite severe. We're talking about contamination, pollution. So anything that actually reduces the contact of that water with the resource, with the mineral, is really important. Some innovative technologies around that. And then if it does contact, of course, you know, what are you going to do with that? And typically that goes to water treatment. And there's the water treatment issue is really important, considering that the mine, you know, might have just a few years of operation, or it might have 50 or 100 years in some cases, but then it closes and then it has to manage that water forever. And so then it becomes, you know, what technologies around that water treatment, and then it becomes cost. So anything which is low cost, manages those constituents and the parameters of interest in that water long term at a lower cost is really interesting for the mining space. So one of my other experiences was working with the biggest gold corporation in the world, Barrick Gold, which is a Canadian company. I was vice president of water management for Barrick for 3 years, and it was all about risk. You know, I wanted to sleep at night knowing that whatever site in the world, and we were talking about Africa, South America, North America, Europe, you know, and Canada, of course, you know, that the water within a facility, or there's always enough water for the supply, because if you didn't have water supply, you don't produce gold. The investors are interested in about that. But if you have some sort of event like a contamination spill, that destroys trust with the community, and then you close the mine, and then you've got, again, losses of tens or hundreds of millions, or even a stranded asset. So it all came about risk management around water. How can you identify, got all the things in place? Have you got the right sensors? Are they measuring the right things? Is that data stream coming to you? Is it being processed? Is it giving me the real information for me to make a decision about something, or to act on something to avoid that issue, which either stops the mine, causes a poor reputation for my company, but also helps me sleep at night. So at the right cost. So those are the real things that we were focusing on, and interested in the technology, but it's really moved towards risk. And that's where you see today, everybody's talking about ESG. Everybody's talking about things like, in mining context, tailings dams, which has been some really horrific disasters around that. And water is a real driver and a real factor in that. How do you measure that? How do you measure the risk, quantify the risk? What do you do about it? How do you act in time? Monitoring, sensors, all that sort of thing, online, remote, is really important to be able to manage all those water risks. And that's where the bigger corporations are struggling, because they're also finding a real lack of that understanding what's happening on the ground to be able to communicate that to the C-suite. So, and something that they understand, because the C-suite's typically lawyers and accountants and people like that. So it becomes how do you translate those water risks and issues to a language that everybody understands.
Very good. Thank you so much, John. So I think one of the things that you just touched on actually covers some of the themes that the other panelists have touched on as well, which is sort of around this theme around risk management and having being able to make informed decisions. So one of the challenges we have is, as you pointed out, in mining, for example, you could have a new build, or you can have a 50 or 100-year-old mine, and the problems can be different based on the legacy issues that you have at a particular site. And you can imagine the same thing happens in a municipality as well, where you have infrastructure that's over 100 years old, and then you're having new developments that are going in as well. So I guess my question that I have for all of the panelists right now to sort of think about is around this concept of risk management and being able to sort of communicate to the people that are actually making the decisions on who's going to pay for these changes. What is the best approach when you're thinking about adopting new technology, where you could have a new build opportunity, but you also have all these issues with your infrastructure, older infrastructure, and there may be some retrofits that you may need to do. Perhaps I could have the panelists comment about what would be your strategy for being able to convince those that actually have the purse strings for what's going to be these most critical issues that you need to deal with around these kind of retrofit versus sort of new build concepts around this theme of risk management. So how do you communicate that? And maybe I'll start with you, John.
I think mining industry is very, I've heard people talk about very conservative, and they like to have something proven. No one likes to really be the first off the block, and then it becomes cost. They also don't see the value in water. They don't understand value. Cost. Water is an input, so it becomes cost. But I think though, if you can actually demonstrate, there's a nexus on that though. If something is proven, costs a good cost, but can solve their issue, of course, it's the winner. But you've got to demonstrate what the implications of not doing it, I think is actually quite important. Demonstrate what the costs and the implications could be. They all like pilots. You've got to be very careful with pilots because that could cost you a lot of money and not get you anywhere. But of course, having some sort of partner on board who is amenable to doing those types of things, of course, and is willing to pay for it. And there are some companies who do that, is very important, because then that becomes your flagship, of course. Yeah, I think the things are changing in the mining industries. Now is a good time with electromobility. These, people want copper, people want lithium, people want cobalt, and we've got a new generation, because with how things have happened, you've got people who are much more technology orientated, much more value orientated, much more ESG orientated. They're willing to try some things, and so I'm speaking a little bit from the past. I think it's changing. I think there's a shift here. And people might like to look at a little bit more new technologies, but it's going to be all very much digital, remote. Show me the values, but keep my costs down is really quite key.
Okay. Thank you so much, John. I'm gonna move now the question over to Paul, because Paul, you're also working in a conservative municipality that moves slowly, and you have to go through a rather large bureaucracy to make decisions around procurement. What's the strategy that you've used to be able to demonstrate that there's a need and that we need to change the way we're doing things around water?
So Shannon, I think one of the competitive advantages that Metro Vancouver has is when we undertake spending, we get the GST rebate back from Ottawa.
Yes.
And we skim off some of that into a dedicated sustainability fund.
Ah.
And so when the politicians are making decisions on risky ventures that is a pilot of some sort of newfangled technology that has not been tested anywhere in the world, they consider the dollars to be free money. It's money back from Ottawa.
Yes.
And I think that's our competitive advantage at Metro Vancouver. And internally, we need to make the case. It's not a standard business case. We've actually started using Foresight's business model canvas, the impact business model canvas, and use that to ensure that each proposition that we put forward has the right value proposition that makes sense for our utility. So ultimately, yes, it is a business case, costs and potential revenue, but that helps to ease the decision-making process.
Very
So
interesting.
stop there.
Oh, that's wonderful. Nice to hear about that pot of gold that you have, Paul. So in contrast to that, I wanted to turn it over to Bud to ask you, so there's a competitive advantage that you have at a university. Maybe you can touch on the campus as a living lab sort of opportunity and the fact that you have all the researchers there, sort of to contrast what the competitive advantage might be for your organization.
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic area to highlight just because there are so many opportunities. We do have a campus as a living lab fund at UBC, which can fund research projects usually on operational related issues. So certainly water projects have been funded previously. So that's an opportunity area. But of course, there's myriad other potential funding opportunities where we can align academic research, government grants, and operational needs. A good example, actually, if you want to think about something at a really big scale, is our Bioenergy facility, which started as a research collaboration, the original one, and now is continuing to, we have a major expansion about to be completed. And it also has a very significant research component built into it. So these have been great partnerships between academia and government and UBC operations. So that potential is certainly there. And I think another point just to mention too on sort of the justification or the rationale to move these projects forward is what we really try and focus on a lot is not only the potential for research collaborations or innovation, but also trying to identify as many co-benefits as we possibly can, in addition to the future cost savings that might accrue, other co-benefits. And I think now what we're seeing similar to what John was mentioning is that there's really a lot of motivation and interest around climate action. Like there's serious commitment. And so I think people are really recognizing that the do the right thing part is becoming more and more of a factor. And so that I think plays a role in decision making as well. And we are currently exploring our own internal carbon pricing, like similar to what Metro has in place to help inform decision making as well.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bud. So Jeff, I wanted to turn it over to you now, because you're in an interesting situation in which you have worked with large corporations as well as a number of startups. And often, if we think about the startups, they're not in a position of power. They're in a position where they have to figure out a partnership where they can have a compelling value proposition to demonstrate how they can solve a problem. And maybe you can sort of walk through what some of those challenges are, or where you've seen is a really good strategy to get those partnerships built for these SMEs so they get a chance to actually apply their technology to some of these problems.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. And because you put me last, and well, the other guys got my wheels turning every time somebody else mentioned something, I went full beautiful mind in the background here and just scribbled a bunch of notes. But so I guess going back to the original question about retrofit versus Greenfield and risk management and adoption, I think, to the extent you can align your technologies with retrofit options, it's really good, right? Because people are trying to squeeze more out of existing assets and infrastructure, right? They're looking for clever band-aids to support that goal, because infrastructure money for Greenfield and for new build is always a little bit harder to come by. And there's a spectrum there when you're talking about risk management and adoption. I think, a retrofit solution, and there's great examples in terms of digital solutions and retrofit friendly biological treatment technologies, Nareda, MABR, et cetera, that might be relevant to different applications. I think sometimes a retrofit can be easier to get adopted especially if it's in a side stream or if it's a digital overlay on top of something that someone already has and is not critical infrastructure. So we always see this with adoption timelines of technologies. If you're playing with something that is considered a mainstream critical part of of the mainstream treatment train, you're going to have a longer path to market than someone doing side stream treatment of sludge, for example, or even less risky from the end user's perspective than that. Maybe something like an optimization tool, a digital tool that layers on top of what they already have, plays nice and is agnostic with respect to inputs and outputs and other technologies that might already be in place, and just squeezes more efficiency out of that system. So in the corporate world, again, there's a huge spectrum in terms of that risk profile and willingness to adopt. You've got some corporates that have set up their own accelerator programs within their companies. And a really great one is 100 Plus Accelerator. I'll put it in the chat. It's a collaboration. It used to just be AB InBev, but now they've pulled in Coca-Cola, Unilever, and Colgate-Palmolive into that group. And so they run their whole own accelerator program around well-defined business challenges in their organizations, collectively across their organizations. Yep. And so they're running it like, you know, a little bit like how Imagine H2O runs their cohort, but to go after specific business challenges. And then you've got groups like Procter & Gamble that do that more, it's just an internal operation. So there's great examples across the board. I think you, just like in the municipal space, you need to find the early adopters, those flagship clients that are willing to work with you with your technology. And I think they're kind of self-selecting if they have an accelerator program, right? That they are, you know, the one that you should probably trying to track down first. So that's just a few thoughts around around that. We can explore more in the breakout.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I actually wanted to pick up on this idea of you have to find that early adopter. And because once you've got a pilot or once you've got one customer, then you can use that to showcase the work that you're doing. And actually the best way to do that is to have your client actually talk about how great it went rather than you talking about it. And so sort of building on this, I wanted to sort of go back to this concept of risk management, understanding that a lot of these organizations are really conservative and some of them can't take on financial risk. So you have an organization like Metro Vancouver, which has this pot of gold with the GST, but if you have a small municipality that maybe they don't really have proper treatment right now, they got grandfathered in, but now they're at a point where they want to develop. Now they actually do have to make some decisions, but they have such a small tax base, they really can't take on financial risk. I'd like the panel to talk a little bit about some of these challenges. You've got issues around potential clients that won't take on that financial risk. They may not have their own engineering team, so now they've got to hire outside engineers who may not want to take on the legal risk of actually signing off on new projects. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how do you navigate through that to find who those early adopters would be, knowing that some of the potential clients who you thought sort of would have the bigger pots of money to move forward, municipalities and some of these other more conservative entities, are really in a situation makes it really difficult for them to take risk. And I'm going to open it up to the panel to see who would like to address that. Whoever puts their hand up first. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think a fundamental question even before you get to that, right, with the smaller utilities is that your target customer? So if your technology is suited to a small, or are you seeing the smaller utilities as a stepping stone to larger utilities where your real value proposition lies, and you're worried about kind of demonstration scale and then scaling, which would be kind of the wrong approach, right? You should really be doing something at a demonstration scale within a larger utility if that's where the value proposition is. And if you're having trouble with those financial hurdles with the smaller utility, that's got to be an embedded part. It's not good enough just to have a better mousetrap. You have to have thought through the business model, how procurement's going to work in the majority of the cases, not in the minority of the cases where they're very progressive like Metro Vancouver and kind of have a fund that they're able to execute on. Most smaller utilities won't have that. So I'd say it's as much about business model innovation to make it easy for the client to say yes as it is about your specific technology, right? So that you can de-risk that, because some might just have their hands tied in terms of how they procure in the first place.
Brilliant. And actually, I'm going to put Paul Kadota on the spot for a moment to talk a little bit about the innovation sandbox that you have with wastewater treatment and the opportunities for companies to actually test out their technology, but within a safe environment within Metro Van. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. As you've noted, Metro Vancouver is very conservative. Our wastewater treatment plant has a permit to meet, and our operators don't like testing out newfangled things in their operating environment. So what's been created maybe about 5 years ago is what we're calling the Anasys Research Center. The Anasys Research Hall is located on the wastewater treatment plant site, but at a bit of a distance from the main treatment process. So researchers can essentially book a space and come and go as they need to and test their technology in either the research hall. I think there's like six or seven bays in the research hall. And then there's a little bit of space outdoors, and a lot of the commodities from the wastewater treatment plant from Anasys can be provided to whoever's booked that space there. So I think there's the ability to test some of the technologies there, maybe not all of them. And we do have plans in the future to actually embed test beds throughout the entire treatment plant. So we're targeting the Iona Island facility, which is due for a major upgrade. And if you design it right from the start, a little piece of tank, a little piece of aeration system, right at the very beginning, then it costs hardly anything to put those test beds in place. So that's what we're shooting for the future.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Paul. John, I wanted to turn it back to you for a moment because you're in an interesting situation. If we think about the Chile situation, in which you've got situations in which you have to manage too much water and too little water, depending on what's happening with the climatic conditions and meteorological conditions. But you also have a lot of strong political factors on who gets access to the water. Is it the farmers that are going to get access to the water? Is it the city and people for drinking water that are going to get access? There's socioeconomic access issues as well, whether you actually are on municipal water or whether you actually have deliveries of tanks of water in more rural areas. And how does that fit in when you have a large industry player there, knowing that you touched on this concept of social license? And knowing that there have been these large catastrophic events. We had the mine tailing, a dam breach in Mount Poly from Imperial Metals a number of years ago. 2 years ago, there was 2.5 years ago, there was the dramatic loss of life in Brazil. And a number of these have happened. And it kind of gets back to that theme that many people on the panel talked about infrastructure, and making sure that infrastructure is robust and taken care of and is not just sort of ignored. So maybe you can talk a little bit about these kinds of themes of how do you make a decision when you're working for an industrial enterprise when there's all these other demands on water? How can you be sort of a good corporate citizen in that situation?
Yeah, I know it's trust. Ultimately, everything comes back to trust, doesn't it? So, the reality is in a lot of the places, the mine itself is mining company is actually a low user of water. The other big users of populations, but agriculture, for example. But the mining gets a bad rap, if you like, because of some of the events. So it becomes, what were those failures? What destroyed the confidence or the trust in the company? And it's usually things such as infrastructure. Yeah, so failed infrastructure. Was it built correctly in the first place? What are the materials? What were the design controls? All that sort of stuff. But also it comes back to the digital element, maybe the sensors, the monitoring, is the right information being provided? But then is it provided to the right people? So that does providing that water information, consumption, quality, volume, that sort of scarcity to the population, does that help build trust? And I would say, as a citizen, as a a global citizen, yes, absolutely. Of course, the mining industry traditionally have a problem with that. Not to say that there's a little bit of a confidence issue and being able to release that. So, but if they got over that, if there was some support given to them and some showing the value of providing that water information to the people downstream in that basin who might be using it and showing where the issues are and what they're doing about it, that builds trust and that builds confidence and that gets things moving and gets reputation built or restored in a lot of cases. So I think, but you're talking about something bigger than just water in that sense, that
Yes.
becomes politics.
Yes,
I'm not
exactly.
an expert on that.
But that, I think that's a really important point you brought in around trust, because we've talked about industrial ecology. We've talked about how water isn't isolated. It's connected to so many different things. So when you're thinking about partnerships, when you're thinking about the political issues, when you're thinking about equity and justice, those all end up being grounded within that trust within the society. So I think that's a really important issue that you brought up. So I'm going to pass it back over to Stephen now. We're going to go in our breakout sessions and he's going to explain how that's going to roll out. Oh, you're on mute, Stephen. Oh, yes, there we go.
It's also handy for my lip syncing, which we'll do later. We'll have some songs at the end, and we can stick around if they want to. I could sit and listen to Shannon ask questions all day long. I think something I always point out at Foresight events like this is that the folks on the panel didn't really come here to help probably me, or no offense, probably Shannon too much either. They really showed up here today to help you, the innovators, to make sure that you understand where they're coming from, what their challenges are, what they would love to see you develop. So with that in mind, we're going to jump into our breakout rooms here so you can ask a few more questions. And I saw McCartney, you'd already jumped in with a question for Jeff, so maybe you'll follow that up in his breakout room, or he'll be kind enough to answer that. We're going to throw up the breakout rooms here in a second. And really quickly, if you're not familiar with Zoom breakout rooms, I don't know where you've been the last year, but there will be a little flashing icon there on the bottom where you will be able to select the breakout room of your choice if you have a relatively recently updated version of Zoom. If you're not able to choose your own breakout room, you can always leave quickly, update your Zoom, and come back, and you'll be able to choose a breakout room. Or if you stay in this main room, Astrid will be happy to help assign you. With that, let's open up some breakout rooms. Let's get a little more conversation going. And everyone, we're back. We only have a couple minutes left. I hope you enjoyed those breakout rooms, a chance to chat with some of the folks on the panel, ask your questions. I had a lot of fun in the one that I was in. I want to say thank you first and foremost to our panelists, Jeff Guild from BlueTech Research, John McCartney, Paul Kadota from Metro Vancouver, and where is my memory? Have we lost already our fourth? Bud Fraser from UBC. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for coming and sharing some of the issues that you see at your organization. Again, problem-driven innovation is so challenging. It is hard to get people sometimes to spend time talking about the problems, talking about what they would like to see. So we really appreciate you being here today and sharing some of the knowledge that you have so we can drive for better outcomes, drive for ventures that are successful, and build those companies that will be part of the Canadian economy, its success, and eventually addressing the climate problems that we all see, the challenges around water that you all articulated today. Would also like to thank our friends at UBC, both Entrepreneurship at UBC, Shannon Bard and Paul and Nefret and Alex and Jessica, and as well as our friend Sahan. I think he had to leave from Innovations Partnerships. It's wonderful to work with you on these sorts of events, bringing together early stage innovators, the ventures that Foresight, the venture that you've hosted in the Climate Venture Studio, the researchers that you have to make sure that they're aware of the problems in the industry. I think this is the way that we will build the clean tech ecosystem that we want. For all those who participate today, I applaud your courage to go out and address these problems. They are big problems, but they do need fixing. It may not be a simple road to get those things from technology to commercialized product, but it is possible. We will host other events like this. There is often what someone described to me as a nexus between different industries. So pay attention in the fall. We'll be arranging another series, possibly looking at energy, where obviously they use a lot of water, ag, where lots of water is used. So stay tuned as we let you know about upcoming events in the Climate Solutions series.